In 1956, Baker began searching in a town called Weeks, a place in America with an unusual amount of missing persons reports. Despite having 364 active reports, no one had ever been discovered. Days later, Baker began to see Weeks for what it was, a ghost town full of abandoned buildings. After learning that the events in Weeks seemingly led back to the Macmillan estate, the former heart of Weeks, Baker's search for police reports and complaints became up empty with no legal action reports. An unknown time later, Baker reports awakening in a strange place, with no memory of how he arrived at the location, last recalling heading towards the Macmillan estate on foot. Baker describes his visceral experience as having a seemingly never-ending fire burning beside him surrounded by woodlands. After this, Baker dubs his experiences to be post-awakening. After this post-awakening, all of Baker's entries began to read 1896, even though earlier in the journal he clearly stated that he began his journey in 1956. Unaware of his physiological state of mind, Baker attempted to hike his way out of the woods to no avail. Baker's attempt to escape the woods brought him closer to a nameless terror which stalks the darkness. A horrid shadow. Baker also recalls seeing the entity, personifying it to pluck those who fall into its path, trapping them in a grim repeat of life and death. The entity is a nameless evil that lives in the space between our world and our imagination, the kind of place only revealed in dreams. To eat, the entity reaches out into the hearts of susceptible victims and corrupts them into performing hideous acts because the only way for it to manifest itself in the real world is through an act of extreme violence ending in death. Once this event has taken place, the entity has a handhold into our world, being able to pull people through this weak spot into its own nightmarish construct. The first victims are the corrupted ones, those pushed to do the deeds that summoned this ancient evil in the first place, the killers. Some have to be tortured over endless years to be coerced into doing what the entity wants. The entity is ever patient and the torture even more severe. Eventually they all cave in and start the hunt for the entity. Prey for the entity comes in the form of victims, the survivors, normal people who stumble into these corrupted areas and are pulled through by the entity with no memory of how it happened. Once they awaken by the campfire in the nightmare, there is no escape for them. The entity builds a reflection of the real world in its constructs to confuse the survivors. Unable to really understand the true nature of the world it touches, it tries to replicate it as best it can, although it never quite gets it right. As a result, the world is an ever-changing nightmarish fusion of familiar and strange elements as the entity makes up what it cannot comprehend. In this bizarre world there are several familiar parts. Realms are based on the world it infects, and there are strange mechanical generators the survivors can power up to open gates. If they succeed, they will escape, although only back to the campfire that they started from. The entity needs each survivor to feel hope that there might be a way out of the construct. It is only through this hope that it can feed. Feeding comes in the form of the terrible sacrifice. It is through this bizarre ritual that the entity can extract the nourishment it needs to increase its power. Its eventual goal is to consume the world, and each sacrifice plays a part in that growth. With each passing death, a little of the survivor's soul is lost. Eventually, as all hope evaporates, the survivor becomes less and less useful to the entity, slowly devolving into a cold and emotionless shell. These lost survivors, whose hope has long since left them, eventually become what they once feared so much, the very killers that hunted them. But that's the end of this Dead by Daylight lore video. If you enjoyed it, then make sure you drop a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the other uploads on Dead by Daylight. I will see you all in the next one.